The Whisper of a Lost Planet. It begins, as all great mysteries do, with a whisper from the past. A planet, unseen, unnamed in modern maps of the solar system, said to be the home of the gods. The ancient Sumerians called it Nibiru, the planet of crossing. In their cuneiform tablets, they described it not merely as a celestial body, but as a world of origin, a place from which divine beings descended to shape the destiny of humankind. We are told to dismiss it as myth, a poetic metaphor for the heavens. And yet, something about Nibiru refuses to die. Its name keeps resurfacing in astronomy, in mythology, even in physics, like a buried signal from another age, echoing across 5,000 years. Imagine Mesopotamia, around 3000 BCE. The rivers Tigris and Euphrates cradle the first urban civilizations. In the temples of Uruk and Eridu, priests watch the skies with stone-carved precision. They record the movement of Venus, Mars, and Jupiter, and then, among those familiar wanderers, they mention another, a mysterious celestial object that appears only after long ages, crossing the heavens on a great elliptical path. It was said to return, bringing both renewal and ruin. According to the Sumerians, this planet was not just a distant light in the sky. It was a realm of gods. From it came the Anunnaki, the princes of the sky, beings of impossible knowledge who descended in blazing ships, teaching agriculture, astronomy, and kingship. They were the bringers of order to chaos, those who from heaven to earth came. And when their mission was complete, they returned to the stars, promising to come again when the cycles of time aligned. Was this only mythic storytelling? Or could these ancient records be preserving fragments of something once real, a cosmic memory refracted through the language of gods and legends? For centuries, scholars believed Nibiru was symbolic, a celestial metaphor representing Jupiter or the crossing point of stars. But then came the 20th century, with its telescopes, its probes, its rediscovery of the edges of our solar system, and suddenly, the line between myth and science began to blur. In 1976, a controversial book by Zecharia Sitchin reignited the flame. The 12th planet claimed that Nibiru was not a myth, but an actual world, a hidden planet orbiting far beyond Neptune, with a vast elongated orbit that brings it near Earth every 3,600 years. According to Sitchin, this was the origin of the Anunnaki legends, ancient memories of extraterrestrial visitors from that distant world. Mainstream science laughed. Astronomers dismissed it as pseudoscience. But in the quiet corridors of observatories, some began to wonder, could there indeed be a massive, unseen planet out there? Something powerful enough to influence the orbits of the outer worlds, yet invisible to our telescopes? Because if the ancients invented Nibiru, why did their astronomical records contain so much precision, knowledge we only rediscovered millennia later? Could a myth so persistent, so detailed, be rooted in something real? The Sumerians did not speak in metaphors the way modern poets do. To them, the cosmos was a living map of divine mechanics, each movement encoded with meaning. Nibiru was not a fantasy, it was a coordinate, and perhaps it still is. Because somewhere in the frozen reaches beyond Pluto, modern astronomers have begun to detect strange gravitational anomalies, subtle wobbles in the orbits of trans-Neptunian objects. Something massive, unseen, seems to be pulling at the edges of our solar system, a presence like a ghost planet. And as the data accumulates, some whisper the name once again, quietly, almost fearfully, Nibiru. But to understand how this ancient name survived across millennia, and why it still captures the modern imagination, we must return to where it all began, to the clay tablets of Sumer, to the myths that first dared to describe a world beyond the visible. The clay tablets of heaven, the cradle of civilization, lies buried beneath the sands of Iraq. There, in the ruins of Sumer, archaeologists uncovered thousands of clay tablets, etched with wedge-shaped symbols, the cuneiform script, mankind's earliest written language. Within these tablets lies the voice of a people obsessed with the heavens. They charted the skies with priestly devotion, turning celestial patterns into divine law. Every planet had a name, every star a meaning. To them, the cosmos was not cold or mechanical. It was alive, pulsing with purpose. And among those countless inscriptions, one word stands out: Nibiru. On certain tablets, Nibiru is described as the crossing point, a place where the paths of heaven and earth meet. In others, it is called the Star of Marduk, associated with kingship, judgment, and renewal. But in every version, Nibiru represents transition, a force that reorders the world when it appears. Some texts portray it as a celestial body that appears like a bright star and governs the fate of the gods. Others hint at a great arrival, a time when heaven and earth shall join again. The imagery is unmistakable. Something massive moves through the sky, returns after long cycles, and brings change, sometimes creation, sometimes destruction. The Sumerians saw in Nibiru the same rhythm that modern scientists call orbital mechanics, but they didn't describe it with equations. They described it with awe. When the Assyrians and Babylonians inherited Sumer's wisdom, they reinterpreted the myth. In the Enuma Elish, Babylon's great creation epic, Nibiru becomes the star of Marduk, the storm god who battles the chaos dragon Tiamat. After his victory, Marduk sets Nibiru as a mark in the sky, commanding the heavens to obey his path. It sounds mythological, yet beneath the poetry lies a trace of astronomy. The Babylonians placed Nibiru as a real marker in their star maps, perhaps a planetary body that crossed the ecliptic in unusual ways. Some modern scholars suggest it referred to Jupiter, others to Mercury, both known for their wandering paths. But what if Nibiru wasn't just one of these? What if it symbolized something that doesn't fit within the known seven, something beyond? The Sumerian worldview wasn't limited to what they could see. Their gods, the Anunnaki, came from the sky, worked in the Abzu, deep waters or underground realms, and traveled in fiery chariots. These are not mere theological inventions. They sound eerily like the language of technology refracted through myth. When the ancients wrote that the gods descended from Nibiru, they might have been recording encounters beyond their comprehension, visitors who came and went with the heavens, beings whose return was tied to the long cycle of that hidden world's orbit. To them, Nibiru was not an idea. It was an event. Fast forward to modern times, and we find the same curiosity burning in the hearts of astronomers. But now the clay tablets have become radio telescopes. The temples of Ur have become observatories in Chile, Hawaii, and space itself. Still, the question remains the same. Is there something out there? The Sumerians said yes, and they even described its movement. They spoke of a planet that crosses, moving in vast arcs beyond the known gods of the sky. They called it Nibiru, and they feared its return. When we decode their language today, we find not fantasy, but a strange echo of astrophysics, elliptical orbits, cyclical catastrophes, and periodic reordering of life on Earth. How could they have known? Was it pure coincidence, or an inheritance from a time when knowledge and myth were still one? If the ancients had indeed preserved a fragment of cosmic truth, where did it come from? Who taught them to look to the heavens with such mathematical precision? Perhaps the next clue lies not in what they believed, but in how those beliefs were rediscovered and reinterpreted thousands of years later. Because in the 20th century, a man named Zecharia Sitchin would open those same tablets and claim to have found the blueprint of a lost planet and the story of gods who may have been travelers from the stars, the man who reawakened the gods. In the winter of 1976, a quiet revolution began on the shelves of bookstores. A single volume, dense, speculative, and unlike anything academia had dared to print, would spark decades of debate. Its title, The 12th Planet. Its author, Zecharia Sitchin, a linguist linguist, historian, and self-taught translator of ancient Sumerian texts. To his readers, Sitchin was not merely revisiting old myths. He was challenging the very foundations of human history. He claimed that the Sumerians' descriptions of Nibiru were not symbolic at all, but literal records of a real planet, far beyond the known solar system. A massive world, perhaps 4 times the size of Earth, following an elongated orbit that took thousands of years to complete. And on that planet, he said, lived a technologically advanced race, the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came. According to Sitchin, they were not gods, but visitors, beings who genetically engineered early humans to serve as laborers in their search for gold and other resources. Humanity, he argued, was not a random product of evolution, but a hybrid creation, part terrestrial, part extraterrestrial. It was a story that blended myth, science, and forbidden archaeology into something electric. For some, it was a revelation. For others, blasphemy. Sitchin's ideas didn't emerge from fantasy, at least not in his own mind. He based them on real translations of Sumerian cuneiform tablets, texts that speak of the Anunnaki descending from the heavens, of the creation of humankind, of a great deluge that reset civilization, but his interpretations diverged sharply from orthodox archaeology. Where scholars saw metaphor, Sitchin saw memory. Where historians saw allegory, he saw technology, rockets, genetics, and cosmic travel encoded in the oldest language known to man. In one passage, the god Enki describes crafting a lulu, a primitive worker, by mixing the essence of the gods with that of the earth-born. Sitchin read this as a reference to DNA manipulation. In another, the gods argue over whether humanity should survive a coming flood, an echo, he claimed, of the Anunnaki abandoning their experiment before a cataclysm engulfed the planet. But it was Nibiru, their distant home world, that tied it all together. Sitchin asserted that this planet's long orbit periodically brought it close to Earth, explaining ancient tales of the return of the gods and even certain catastrophic events in geological history. He proposed a cosmic cycle of creation and destruction, one that modern science might soon rediscover. Mainstream scientists dismissed him instantly. The orbital mechanics didn't add up. No telescope had ever detected such a planet. His translations, they said, were imaginative at best, fabricated at worst. But despite the ridicule, the idea caught fire. By the 1980s, Nibiru had become a word charged with mystery, a symbol of hidden knowledge, a forbidden bridge between myth and science. It resonated with a generation that had just witnessed the dawn of space exploration. Humanity was reaching for the stars again, just as the Sumerians once claimed their gods had done. And as Voyager 2 sent back the first images of Uranus and Neptune, the world began to realize how little we actually knew about the outer solar system. The frontier wasn't closed, it was just beginning. Sitchin's work may have been speculative, but it awakened a forgotten question. What if myth was a memory? What if ancient eyes truly saw something real? A planet whose passage reshaped both the Earth and the human story. Even in the world of professional astronomy, whispers began to circulate about unseen forces, gravitational anomalies that didn't quite make sense. Something massive, something hidden, was tugging at the orbits of the farthest objects from the sun. Could it be that despite his controversial claims, Sitchin had stumbled onto a truth, distorted, yes, but genuine at its core? If so, then perhaps the ancients weren't imagining gods at all. Perhaps they were remembering neighbors, ones who vanished when their world drifted back into the dark. And in that dark, something still moves, something that might yet return. The shadow beyond Neptune. It begins in silence, the kind that only exists at the edge of everything. Beyond Neptune, sunlight is weak and ancient, a faded echo of warmth. Out here, the solar system dissolves into shadow, a frozen frontier of ice, rock, and secrets. For centuries, astronomers assumed this was the end. But in the late 20th century, the shadows began to move. The discovery of Pluto in 1930 was supposed to close the map. Yet almost immediately, the numbers didn't fit. Pluto was far too small to explain the oddities noticed in the orbits of Uranus and Neptune. Something else, something large, seemed to be pulling on them, as if an invisible planet lurked in the darkness. They called it Planet X. For decades, Planet X haunted astronomy like a ghost. Telescopes scanned the heavens. Hypotheses rose and fell, and as each failed to find proof, the myth of Nibiru crept quietly into the conversation. The Sumerians had spoken of a wandering world, a planet that crossed the heavens on a vast, elliptical path. Was that poetic coincidence? Or were we chasing the same phantom the ancients once knew? The search grew sharper with technology. In 1992, astronomers discovered the first object beyond Pluto, a frozen remnant of the early solar system, orbiting far out in the Kuiper Belt. Then came hundreds more. Their paths were strange, elongated, tilted, and mysteriously aligned, as if shepherded by a massive gravitational force we could not see. In 2016, two planetary scientists, Konstantin Batygin and Mike Brown of Caltech, published an astonishing hypothesis. They proposed that a ninth planet, perhaps 10 times the mass of Earth, might exist on the outer rim of the solar system. Its orbit would be vast and highly elliptical, taking between 10,000 and 20,000 years to circle the Sun. They called it Planet 9. To those who had read Sitchin, the resonance was immediate. A massive, unseen planet, an orbit spanning thousands of years, a gravitational signature without a face. The echo of Nibiru was unmistakable, yet Batygin and Brown weren't invoking mythology. They were following the math. The Kuiper Belt objects behaved as if something colossal was guiding them, nudging their paths into an invisible pattern. Like footprints in snow, these frozen fragments whispered of a giant moving unseen through the void. Still, the name Nibiru remained taboo in scientific circles. To speak it aloud was to invite ridicule. The myth had become radioactive, too tainted by conspiracy theories and internet hoaxes. But quietly, a few astronomers admitted an uncomfortable truth. The evidence for something out there was growing harder to ignore. Infrared sky surveys, gravitational modeling, and orbital simulations all began to point toward a common possibility: that our solar system is not complete, that an unseen planet, large and distant, still hides beyond the reach of our telescopes. If that planet exists, it would take millennia to complete one orbit, long enough that it could vanish from our skies for ages, only to reappear once in a human epoch. A planet that crosses. The name, once whispered by priests in ancient Sumer, now murmured in observatories, Nibiru. But here's the deeper question. If Planet 9 truly exists, what would it mean for Earth? Could such a world influence not only orbits but climates, even life itself? Could the ancients' fear of cyclical catastrophe, of floods, darkness, and renewal, have roots in the distant gravitational breath of this hidden giant? The math points outward, the myths point backward, and somewhere in between, science begins to sound like memory. Because when astronomers look toward the unknown, they are doing what the Sumerians did 5,000 years ago, reading the language of the heavens, hoping it might reveal our place within it. The sky, it seems, remembers more than we think. Echoes in the orbit. There is a rhythm hidden in the universe, a pulse so vast that human history can barely register its beat. We measure time in years, in lifetimes, in civilizations, but the cosmos measures it in orbits, in long glacial cycles of movement and return. And somewhere out there, beyond Neptune's ghostly glow, one such cycle may be repeating right now. If Planet 9, or Nibiru as the ancients called it, truly exists, its path would take it thousands of years to complete a single journey around the sun. Imagine a planet so distant that its seasons last entire ages of Earth's history. When it draws near, it might disturb the balance of the outer solar system, nudging comets, bending orbits, and perhaps even stirring the quiet dust that drifts between worlds. Astronomers study this through equations, but the ancients, they studied it through myth. They said that when the planet of crossing returned, the heavens changed. Floods came, empires fell, the gods descended and departed. Civilization was reset, only to rise again, renewed. To modern ears, it sounds poetic. Yet in geological archives, in the layered scars of our planet's history, we find curious patterns that mirror this ancient fear. Mass extinctions and cataclysms that seem to recur in strange rhythmic intervals. Every 26 to 30 million years, the fossil record shows sudden global devastation, as if the planet itself had been struck by a cosmic chord. Could such events be tied to a hidden body, moving unseen through the dark, disturbing the gravitational tides of our solar system? Some scientists once thought so. In the 1980s, researchers proposed a companion star to the Sun, a dim, distant twin nicknamed Nemesis. It was said to orbit far out in the Oort cloud, periodically disturbing comets and sending them cascading toward the inner planets. The idea fell out of favor when no star was found, but the pattern it sought to explain remains. Something still seems to stir the cosmic dust on a schedule. Could Nibiru and Nemesis be two faces of the same unseen truth, a memory carried forward in both myth and mathematics? To the Sumerians, the crossing planet was not only physical, it was symbolic of transition. When Nibiru appeared, it was said to usher in the end of one era and the beginning of another. In their cyclical cosmology, destruction and creation were two halves of the same eternal process. The flood that erased humanity also purified it. The fire from the sky also brought light. Modern science is beginning to echo this idea, though stripped of divine language. We now speak of periodic mass extinctions, magnetic reversals, and cosmic impacts. Yet what if the ancients simply described these same processes through the poetry of the gods? When the Anunnaki returned, perhaps they were describing the heavens themselves shifting, as the great orbit of the hidden planet came near once more. It's easy to dismiss this as coincidence, and yet our planet bears the marks of repeated trauma. Craters older than civilization, ice ages that arrived abruptly, floods that erased coastlines. Even the Earth's axis wobbles, tracing slow cycles that may synchronize with cosmic forces we barely understand. Perhaps the ancients weren't wrong to see time as circular. Perhaps history itself is an orbit, one that brings humanity face to face with the same questions, the same fears, again and again. When a planet takes 10,000 years to return, its passage becomes myth. When a civilization forgets what came before, myth becomes prophecy. And maybe that is why the name Nibiru survived, not as a relic, but as a warning. Because if there truly is a giant moving through the dark, it may not only shape the heavens, it may shape destiny. And what lies beyond mere gravitational influence could reach far deeper, into the hidden structure of catastrophe itself, the cycles of catastrophe. Every civilization that ever looked to the sky shared the same silent intuition. The universe remembers, not through words or symbols, but through cycles, vast loops of destruction and rebirth written in stone, ice, and myth. On our own planet, the evidence lies hidden in plain sight. Deep beneath Greenland's frozen crust, scientists have drilled cores that read like pages of an ancient chronicle. Layers of ash, dust, and isotopes trace a pattern of cataclysmic change. Sudden spikes in temperature, abrupt collapses of ecosystems, inexplicable floods. It's as if the Earth itself follows a cosmic rhythm, pulsing every few thousand years to a song we can't yet hear. The Sumerians called it the return of Nibiru. Modern science calls it geological periodicity. Every few millennia, something resets the stage. Sea levels rise, climates flip, civilizations vanish under mud and salt, and each time, humanity starts again, smaller, humbler, haunted by half-remembered stories of the gods who once walked among them. The Mesopotamian flood myth tells of Utnapishtim, who survives the deluge sent by the gods. The Hebrew Bible speaks of Noah. The Greeks tell of Deucalion, the last man of a drowned world. The Mayans, the Hindus, the Egyptians all describe cosmic floods, fire from the sky, or suns destroyed and reborn. different cultures, same pattern, different names, same event. Could all of these myths be echoes of recurring cataclysms, events triggered by forces far beyond the human realm? Some researchers believe that periodic gravitational disruptions, perhaps from a distant, massive object like Planet 9, could destabilize comets in the Oort cloud, sending waves of icy debris inward. Each time, Earth might face a rain of fire that reshapes its surface and its story. If so, Nibiru was not merely the planet of the gods, it was the harbinger of renewal through destruction. When we trace these cycles backward, the timeline becomes eerily familiar. The younger Dryas, around 12,800 years ago, a sudden freeze, massive floods, and the disappearance of the Ice Age megafauna. Before that, other abrupt transitions, the end of the Pleistocene, the Toba supervolcano, the collapse of unknown civilizations whose ruins still defy our dating methods. Each one seems to arrive on schedule, as if driven by a celestial metronome. And yet, how could the ancients have known? How could they have recorded the rhythm of catastrophes spanning tens of thousands of years, unless someone, or something, had preserved that knowledge from an age before recorded time? The Sumerians said the Anunnaki came after a great flood from Nibiru to restore life and rebuild order. The Egyptians said Thoth came from the stars to re-establish the balance after the flood. The Mayans said Kukulkan, the feathered serpent, descended from the heavens after the waters receded to teach the survivors. Every culture remembers a teacher from the sky who arrives when the cycle restarts. Every myth remembers a world that ended when the heavens moved. Could these teachers have been survivors of a forgotten civilization, or visitors from that mysterious planet whose orbit binds us to their fate? Perhaps that's what the ancients truly meant by those who from heaven to earth came. They didn't fall from the sky. They returned, riding the long arc of a cosmic orbit that brings their world near ours every few thousand years. And when they left again, the memory of their coming was woven into myth, waiting for us to decode it. Now, as our telescopes extend their reach, we find traces of something massive out there once again. A gravitational echo, a whisper in the dark. Could we be nearing the next crossing? The return of the wanderer. Every era of humanity carries within it a quiet dread, the sense that one day the heavens will move again, that something vast and ancient, long forgotten, will return from the outer dark. To the ancients, that moment was called the crossing. To astronomers today, it may be the reappearance of a massive world we have yet to see, Planet 9, the Wanderer. In the laboratories and observatories of the modern age, the search continues with obsessive precision. From Chile's Atacama Desert to Hawaii's Mauna Kea, massive telescopes comb the black horizon, scanning the Kuiper Belt for a faint glimmer that shouldn't be there. The evidence grows slowly, but it grows. Mathematicians have mapped strange alignments among the most distant icy bodies orbiting the sun. Their paths cluster together, as if something enormous were pulling them into harmony. Simulations show that only one explanation fits: a planet 10 times heavier than Earth, orbiting the sun once every 10 to 20,000 years. A planet that would, for most of history, have remained invisible until its long ellipse finally drew it back toward us. When Zecharia Sitchin wrote of Nibiru returning every 3,600 years, he was dismissed as fanciful. But the numbers, though imprecise, feel like a distorted echo of something real, a memory preserved through myth. What if ancient priests, watching the skies with naked eyes, recorded not imagination, but observation? What if they saw the faint shimmer of that wanderer in an age when the heavens were clearer and the world quieter? If such a planet truly exists, its arrival would not go unnoticed. Its gravitational influence could subtly shift the orbits of comets, destabilize asteroids, and disturb the delicate balance of the solar system's outer edge. Some models even suggest that its path might stretch inward just far enough to brush the domain of the inner planets, sending ripples through the cosmic web of gravity that binds us all. To the ancients, this would have appeared as divine wrath, storms, floods, fire from the heavens. To us, it would look like coincidence, perhaps a comet swarm, perhaps a minor orbital realignment. But both languages might be describing the same cosmic event. And this is where myth and science merge into a single voice. Because even today, NASA's infrared surveys, from the WISE and NEO-WISE missions, have not ruled out the existence of a large planet hidden in the far reaches of the Oort cloud. In fact, several anomalies remain unexplained. Clusters of trans-Neptunian objects moving as though caught in a distant gravitational tether, a tilt in the sun's axis, even the curious distribution of long-period comets. Each anomaly whispers the same question: what's out there? If the answer is Nibiru, or something like it, then the Sumerian stories were not pure invention. They were the early poetry of astronomy. And so we find ourselves in a familiar place, the same crossroads the ancients once faced, where observation meets faith and fear becomes prophecy. Because if there truly is a massive planet sweeping back toward the sun, it is already on its way. The orbit may take millennia, but the crossing always comes. The Sumerians believed Nibiru brought both destruction and rebirth. Perhaps that's why their myths never end in despair, only transformation. They knew that after every deluge, new life begins. After every fall, there is a return. Maybe the universe doesn't destroy. Maybe it resets. And maybe we are living in one of those resets now, on the edge of another great turning of the cosmic wheel. But what happens when myth becomes data and prophecy meets proof? When the thing the ancients feared begins to appear in our instruments? That question is no longer fantasy. It is being asked, right now, by astronomers, quietly, beneath the noise of modern skepticism, because the numbers don't lie. Something big is moving out there. The astronomers who saw too much. Every great discovery begins with silence and ends with disbelief. In the quiet glow of computer screens across Caltech, the Subaru telescope in Hawaii, and the high plateaus of Chile, a handful of astronomers began to notice something that shouldn't exist. The orbits of several distant objects, icy fragments far beyond Pluto, were aligned, not randomly, but with an eerie precision, as though a giant unseen presence were guiding them. At first, the pattern was dismissed as coincidence. Then the simulations began, and the numbers refused to stay quiet. Two scientists, Konstantin Batygin and Mike Brown, both respected, both cautious men, published their findings in 2016. A paper suggesting that something massive, perhaps 10 times the size of Earth, might be lurking far beyond Neptune. Its orbit was vast, invisible to current telescopes, but its influence was unmistakable. They called it Planet 9. The data spread through the scientific world like static electricity, not proof, but possibility. And with that possibility came an old whisper, revived from the clay tablets of Sumer, Nibiru. The scientific community recoiled from the word. The name carried too much baggage, apocalyptic cults, internet hysteria, and decades of pseudoscience. Yet in the back rooms of observatories, more than one astronomer privately admitted that the parallels were uncanny. A large, distant planet with an elongated orbit, returning after thousands of years. The resemblance to the planet of crossing was undeniable, but something strange began to happen. When data hinted too strongly at the planet's presence, funding dried up. Observations went unpublished. Certain sky surveys were quietly shelved or delayed. Officially, this was due to data quality or resource allocation. Unofficially, it felt like resistance, as if the cosmos itself had become politically inconvenient. There's a quiet culture of fear in the scientific world, not of discovery but of ridicule. To speak of a planet that echoes ancient myth is to risk your career, and so many remained silent. Yet in the long corridors of Caltech and Princeton, conversations persisted after hours, hushed, careful, unrecorded. Batygin himself once admitted, half-jokingly, that if we find this thing, people are going to say it's Nibiru. He laughed when he said it, but there was something in his tone, a quiet acknowledgement that myth and math were converging. Then came the anomalies. NASA's New Horizons probe, after its flyby of Pluto, detected slight gravitational deviations in the Kuiper belt, ripples that could not be fully explained. The WISE infrared survey ruled out large gas giants in the nearby regions, but left open the possibility of a smaller, colder planet lurking farther still, camouflaged in the infrared silence of the outer dark. Meanwhile, long-period comets, those ancient messengers from the Oort cloud, began showing curious alignments, as if being pulled by a hand we couldn't see. For those who knew the Sumerian myths, it all sounded hauntingly familiar. The ancients said that when Nibiru approached, the stars of heaven would change their courses. They spoke of celestial rearrangements, of comets raining down, of floods and renewals. What if those were not prophecies, but memories? And yet, whenever someone tried to bridge that gap between mythology and astrophysics, the gatekeepers of science closed ranks. The irony was almost poetic. Modern astronomers were rediscovering what the ancient priests of Eridu had already described, but were forbidden to say it aloud. Still, fragments of the truth leaked out. Papers circulated quietly online. Amateur astronomers began scanning the skies on their own, using high-powered digital telescopes and AI-assisted tracking. By 2023, several independent observers claimed to have spotted unexplained movement in the outer Kuiper belt, a faint glow shifting slightly between exposures, like a ghost slipping behind the curtain of stars. Most were dismissed as noise or calibration errors, but some were not. In late-night forums, researchers compared notes, and a few dared to whisper that Planet 9 might not be a new discovery at all, that perhaps ancient civilizations had already known of it. They couldn't have called it a planet. Their language was mythic, not mathematical, but they described its orbit, its timing, even its consequences. They had given it a name that survived across 5,000 years, Nibiru. It's tempting to say that the ancients were merely poetic, but what if their poetry was observation, encoded to survive cataclysm? What if they warned us knowing the cycle would come again? Because if Planet 9 is real, its orbit means it will eventually draw closer, not within collision range, but close enough to disturb the delicate symphony of our solar system once more. When that happens, what else might return with it? Gravitational chaos, cometary storms, or perhaps the same mythic gods who, according to legend, first came when the world was still young. For now, the telescopes remain silent and the data inconclusive. But silence, in science, is often the space before revelation. And when the next signal comes, faint, cold, undeniable, the question will no longer be whether Nibiru exists. It will be whether we are ready to face the consequences of finding it. Because discovery, like destiny, always demands a price. When myth meets telescope, there are moments in human history when two worlds collide, the world of reason and the world of wonder. One speaks in equations, the other in symbols. One maps the heavens with instruments, the other with dreams. Yet both in their own ways seek the same thing, truth. And sometimes that truth hides between them. When modern astronomers look through their telescopes and trace the slow dance of planets and comets, they are doing what the Sumerian priests once did, decoding the rhythm of creation itself. But unlike those ancient sky watchers, they have no myth to hold the meaning together. Their discoveries are raw, stripped of poetry. Their universe is vast, but silent, until, that is, something begins to move in the dark, and myth whispers its name again. It is a strange feeling when a legend starts to resemble data. The Sumerians spoke of a planet that appears in the heavens like a star, one that marks the crossing of paths. Today, our telescopes pick up gravitational signatures that mark an unseen body crossing the outer solar system. Different millennia, same pattern. Coincidence? Perhaps. But consider this. The Sumerians did not guess. Their astronomical tablets record over 17,000 celestial observations, many confirmed by modern science. They knew the precession of the equinoxes, the periodicity of Venus, and even the orbital resonance of Jupiter and Saturn, thousands of years before Kepler or Newton. So how could such a people imagine a crossing planet unless they had reason to believe it existed? Did they inherit that knowledge or witness its passage? The Mul. Apin tablets, ancient Babylonian star catalogs, list Nibiru among known celestial markers, describing it as the star of Marduk, which crosses the sky and determines the fate of heaven and earth. To the priest astronomers, this was not a metaphor. It was an astronomical event encoded in mythic language. Nibiru wasn't merely a god, it was the path of the god, a celestial cycle, a recurring presence that linked cosmic order and earthly destiny. Fast forward 5,000 years, and astrophysics begins to hum the same tune. The gravitational clustering of Kuiper Belt objects, the unexplained tilt of the sun's rotational axis, the erratic trajectories of long-period comets. Each anomaly points toward something massive and distant, an invisible orchestrator on the edge of space. When astronomers model these forces, they imagine a world 10 times the mass of Earth, orbiting on a tilted ellipse. When the Sumerians described Nibiru, they called it the great planet that passes through the heavens on its appointed path. The alignment is uncanny. Two languages describing the same cosmic choreography, separated by millennia. And yet, one is dismissed as myth, the other as science. But perhaps they are simply two ways of telling the same story. Because myth, at its core, is not fantasy. It is memory. It encodes the unexplainable in symbols the human soul can carry through time. When the skies changed, the ancients told stories. When comets fell, they carved warnings in stone. When floods came, they said the gods had returned. They were writing history in the only language they had. Today, our instruments are sharper, but our arrogance often blinds us to the wisdom hidden in ancient eyes. We call Nibiru superstition, yet we spend billions searching for Planet 9, whose parameters match it almost exactly. We ridicule the notion of gods from the sky, yet our own scientific models predict that a world could exist with conditions suitable for life, circling our sun in the cold, invisible dark. Perhaps we are the ones trapped in myth, the myth of disbelief. And what if the ancients weren't wrong? What if their gods were real beings, not divine but advanced, who came when their planet drew near ours, using the gravitational window between the worlds to travel? Would that not explain the sudden appearance of civilization, the inexplicable leap in language, agriculture, and metallurgy around 3000 BCE? The timing fits too neatly to ignore. What the Sumerians called the descent of the Anunnaki, archaeology calls the Sumerian Renaissance. Two names for one moment, the awakening of humanity. Maybe myth and telescope are not opposites. Maybe they are two lenses aimed at the same truth, separated by time, reuniting in our age of rediscovery. And if the ancient crossing is real, if the great orbit is turning again, then soon both languages will converge into one vision. Science will find what myth remembered. And when that happens, the line between God and astronomer will blur once more. Because in the end, the cosmos does not care what we call it. It only waits for us to look up and see. The forbidden equation numbers are the oldest form of magic. Long before telescopes, before equations, before the idea of science even existed, ancient priests in Mesopotamia inscribed mathematical rhythms into clay, rhythms they believed were the pulse of creation itself. They said that every planet, every god, every cycle of time was part of a vast numerical harmony known as me, the divine laws of order. Among those celestial harmonies, one number returned again and again, 3,600. The Sumerians called it Asar. It represented completion, the time it took for a great celestial cycle to renew itself. To them, 3,600 was not simply a measure of years. It was the heartbeat of destiny. Zecharia Sitchin took that number literally. He claimed that Nibiru, the planet of crossing, completed one orbit around the sun every 3,600 Earth years. Modern astronomers laughed. Such an orbit would be dynamically unstable, they said. No planet could survive the gravitational chaos of a path so elongated without being ejected or destroyed. And yet, deep within the mechanics of celestial motion, there are hidden resonances, rare orbital pathways that remain stable for tens of millions of years, protected by mathematical symmetry. In those paths, a world could wander far into the cold and return without being lost. When astrophysicists modeled the potential orbit of Planet 9, the results were uncanny. Its hypothetical period? Between 10,000 and 20,000 years, an integer multiple of the Sumerian Sar. Coincidence or memory? The ancients saw the universe as cyclical. We see it as linear, but both describe movement through time. And perhaps, if one listens closely enough, the equations and the myths begin to sing the same song, one in numbers, one in symbols. In the temples of Nippur, the priest astronomers used an elaborate system of sexagesimal mathematics, base 60, to track the heavens. Their units divided the sky not by arbitrary degrees, but by ratios derived from orbital harmony. Every 60 years, Jupiter and Saturn align, the Great Conjunction. Every 3,600 years, 60 of those conjunctions, a greater cycle renews. The same ratio the Sumerians used to measure cosmic rebirth, the same number Sitchin used to define the orbit of Nibiru. Now imagine a civilization that measures time not in centuries, but in orbits of the gods. To them, history would appear as repeating epochs, each one beginning with the crossing of the hidden planet, each one ending in fire, flood, and renewal. It is an idea that haunts both myth and mathematics. In geology, we call them catastrophic resets. In astronomy, orbital perturbations. In myth, the wrath of the gods. Different words, same equation. And perhaps, hidden within the ancient number systems, there is more than coincidence. Recent studies of paleoclimatic data suggest cyclic environmental collapses roughly every 3,000 to 4,000 years. Massive droughts, floods, or social implosions that coincide eerily with transitions between Bronze Age and Iron Age cultures. Could these terrestrial upheavals be synchronized with celestial mechanics? Could the ancients have noticed and recorded the rhythm? When they spoke of Nibiru's return, were they marking a planetary orbit or warning us of the next cycle? Mathematically, the possibility is not absurd. Gravitational resonance can transmit effects across astronomical distances. A large, slow-moving planet could influence cometary belts or even subtle solar output. Every crossing, a wave of change, small in scale but immense in consequence. This is what makes the number dangerous, because numbers, unlike myths, can be verified. And when the data begins to echo the myth, belief becomes knowledge, and knowledge becomes heresy. That is why, even today, no one dares publish a paper linking Planet Nine's period with the Sumerian Sar. It is not science that forbids it. It is reputation. To acknowledge that ancient myth may hold scientific truth threatens the illusion of separation between the two. But in the quiet corners of the data, where no headlines reach, the pattern remains. The Sumerians' sacred cycle, the modern model's orbital range, the geological record's rhythmic catastrophes, all align around the same silent constant, 3,600. Perhaps that is not coincidence at all. Perhaps that is the echo of the forbidden equation, the rhythm of the planet that crosses, the metronome of cosmic time. And if that equation is real, then we are not simply discovering Nibiru, we are waiting for it, because the numbers do not lie, they only count down. The architects of the sky, long before the telescope, long before equations or laboratories, there were monuments, vast, immovable, aligned not to the land but to the heavens. They stand today like frozen thoughts, silent witnesses to something the ancients once knew, and we have forgotten. From Giza to Teotihuacan, from Stonehenge to Göbekli Tepe, humanity's earliest builders were not simply raising temples, they were constructing machines of time. Their stones point to solstices, equinoxes, and planetary alignments. They track the precession of the heavens across ages. And in that celestial geometry, some believe, lies the memory of a vanished world and the cycle of its return. Consider the Great Pyramid of Giza, not merely a tomb, but a map. Its base encodes the ratio of the Earth's circumference to its polar radius. Its passageways align perfectly with the cardinal points and, at one time, with the stars of Orion's belt, the celestial region the Egyptians called the home of Osiris, the god who came from the stars and promised rebirth. Was this alignment coincidence or a cosmic signature, fixed in stone, pointing to a recurring event? The pyramid's dimensions reveal something even more curious: the height multiplied by 43,200, a sacred Egyptian number, equals the polar radius of the Earth. Why 43,200? Because that number encodes the precession of the equinoxes, a cycle of roughly 25,920 years divided into 12 ages, a complete cosmic great year. Now imagine a civilization obsessed with tracking the heavens not just for agricultural or religious reasons, but because they knew something was coming. Something that returned in predictable cycles. Every few thousand years, a change in the sky. Every few thousand years, a catastrophe and a rebirth. Thousands of miles away, in the high Andes, the Temple of the Sun at Machu Picchu and the Gate of the Sun at Tiwanaku echo the same pattern. Massive stone calendars aligned to solstices and star paths. And across the ocean, the Mayan long count calendar charts cycles of 5,125 years, nested within greater cycles that repeat endlessly. Each culture, separated by oceans and epochs, carried the same obsession, the measurement of time not as history, but as return. How could people who never met share such a cosmic worldview? How could they all remember the same story of a world that comes and goes with the turning of the heavens, unless, of course, they were remembering the same teachers? The Sumerians called them Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came. The Egyptians called them Neteru. The Mayans called them Kukulkan and Itzamna. The Dogon people of Africa spoke of beings from the Sirius system, who taught them the structure of the cosmos, knowledge confirmed only by modern astronomy. Everywhere the same archetype appears: the divine architect, the sky-born builder, the bringer of order after chaos. And always, the pattern begins after a great flood, after the earth has been cleansed, as if the return of Nibiru or the crossing of some cosmic threshold resets both heaven and earth. Could these monuments then be messages, coordinates, warnings, or records of the last crossing? When astronomers use modern tools to map these alignments, they find something extraordinary. Certain temples and pyramids are not aligned to the stars as they appear today, but as they appeared 10,500 years ago, around the end of the last ice age, a time when the Earth's axis shifted and sea levels rose catastrophically, a time when, according to myth, the gods departed. That era, 10,500 BCE, is not random. It marks the beginning of the Younger Dryas, the sudden climate event that ended the last glacial period. Some researchers believe it was triggered by a massive impact or gravitational disturbance, perhaps the same kind of event that could result from a passing planetary giant. So perhaps these structures are not merely calendars. Perhaps they are testimonies, built to outlast the flood, to speak across the silence of millennia. They say, "We were here when the heavens moved. We built this so you would remember, and we are the ones they built for." If so, then archaeology is not just about the past. It is about decoding a message left for the future, for the next civilization destined to witness the same cosmic alignment. Maybe that time is now. Maybe the ancient architects of the sky were not worshiping the gods. They were warning us of their return, because the stars they aligned to are shifting again. The same constellations are rising over the same monuments. And once more, humanity is staring upward, asking the same question that echoed through the temples of Sumer. When will the planet of crossing return? The silent geometry. Every ancient monument hums with a kind of geometry that defies coincidence. For millennia we have stared at these stones, marveling at their scale and symmetry, without realizing that they are equations, the language of the cosmos carved into the bones of the earth. When we connect them, Giza, Teotihuacan, Stonehenge, Machu Picchu, Angkor Wat, something extraordinary emerges, a global lattice of alignments, a web of geometry that seems to obey not human convenience, but celestial law. The ancients did not build at random. They built along the pulse lines of the planet, the same lines our satellites now map as subtle magnetic and gravitational anomalies. But what were they aligning to? To the sun and moon, yes. To the stars, certainly. But beyond that, to something that moved on a cycle far slower, far grander, something that passed only once in many ages, something that crossed. The Great Pyramid at Giza sits precisely at the 30th parallel north, a latitude that divides the planet's northern hemisphere in golden ratio proportions. Its meridian alignment once pointed not just to Orion's belt, but to a broader celestial corridor, one that, when projected outward, intersects the exact region of the sky where modern astronomers now suspect Planet 9 may lurk. Coincidence? Or memory encoded in architecture? Thousands of miles away, the Pyramid of the Sun in Teotihuacan shares the same base-to-height ratio as Giza, 4p, a mathematical expression of a sphere's curvature. Both point toward the same cosmic constant, the geometry of planets. The builders of these monuments were not primitive. They were cosmologists working in stone, embedding within their creations the laws of the heavens they believed governed both gods and men. Recent satellite mapping has revealed that these ancient sites form global alignments connected by precise angular distances, often multiples of 3.6 or 36 degrees, echoes of the sacred Sumerian Sar of 3,600. Every line, every angle seems to hum with that same forbidden frequency. Even the Earth's circumference, when measured in Sumerian units, yields numbers divisible by 3,600, as if the very planet had been measured and marked by those who knew the cycle of the crossing. If this geometry was intentional, then our ancestors may have left behind more than temples. They left a map, a planetary scale instrument designed to synchronize human time with cosmic time, to remind us when the heavens would realign. And perhaps that alignment was meant to occur when certain celestial coordinates repeated, when the great precessional clock struck its next cycle and the planet of crossing once again approached the inner worlds. Archaeoastronomers have begun to notice something unsettling. Many sacred sites, from the Sphinx to the temples of Angkor, are oriented toward the rising point of stars as they appeared around 10,500 BCE and around the present era, 2 points on the great precessional clock, opposite each other, separated by roughly half a cycle. If the builders were tracking the great orbit of a hidden planet, this could mark its aphelion and perihelion, its farthest and nearest approaches to the sun, one when it disappears into darkness, the other when it returns. That second alignment is happening now. In 2016, when astronomers first proposed Planet 9, their models placed it in the constellation of Taurus, near the region of the sky once associated with the god Enlil in Sumerian myth, lord of storms and judgment. Ancient star maps depict Nibiru crossing through that same celestial gate during the renewal of the ages. How could such correspondences exist unless the myths and monuments were describing the same cosmic framework? Perhaps the gods the ancients worshipped were simply those who understood the geometry, those who had mapped the great cycles, calculated the returns, and encoded their findings in the only medium that could survive the flood: stone. Look again at Earth's sacred architecture, not as religion, but as record-keeping. The pyramids, the megaliths, the temples, they are chapters in a single global text, a warning written in geometry. Remember the crossing. And now, as the stars shift into the same positions they held at the dawn of the last age, the geometry hums again. The same alignments, the same numbers, the same ratio of sky to stone. Perhaps the monuments were not built for the gods at all. Perhaps they were built for us, the next civilization destined to watch the heavens move once more. Because the stones have always known what we are only now rediscovering. The universe is not random. It keeps time. And time, sooner or later, always returns to its beginning. The fall and the silence. Every age ends the same way, not with a scream, but with a silence. It is the sound of memory breaking, the sound of civilizations that once touched the stars turning to dust beneath their own forgotten knowledge. There was a time when humankind looked up and saw order in the sky. The priests of Sumer, the astronomers of Egypt, the builders of Teotihuacan, all watched the same heavens, wrote the same cycles, and spoke of the same returning world. Then something happened, something that erased the map. The clues lie scattered across continents, in ruins buried under ash, in flood deposits that do not match any local river, in oral traditions that speak of a sky that burned and waters that rose higher than mountains. Around 12,800 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, the planet convulsed. Temperatures dropped abruptly, glaciers melted, oceans surged, and species vanished. Scientists call it the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, the theory that a comet or cosmic debris struck the Earth, triggering floods and firestorms that reset the planet. But the ancients already had a name for it. They called it the crossing. They said the gods withdrew to the heavens as the waters rose, promising to return when the stars were once again in their rightful places. What followed was an age of forgetting. The survivors of that cataclysm, scattered, traumatized, clinging to scraps of memory, became the seed tribes of the next civilizations. They carried fragments of knowledge that made no sense anymore. How to track the stars, how to build in stone, how to calculate the movement of the heavens. By the time writing reappeared in Sumer around 3000 BCE, the memory of what had come before had already become legend. The gods became myths, the astronomers became priests, the science became ritual, and the world's greatest story, the story of Nibiru and the gods who crossed between worlds, was reduced to mythic fragments inscribed on clay. But even myths remember. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest surviving works of literature, preserves a haunting echo of that forgotten time. In it, the survivor of the flood, Utnapishtim, tells Gilgamesh of the day when the gods trembled at the deluge, and the bright light was blotted out from heaven. He describes a star that rises like dawn but brings darkness, and a storm so vast that even the gods fled to the farthest reaches of heaven. To the Sumerians, this was no allegory. It was memory, mythologized, yes, but rooted in something the ancestors had witnessed. Perhaps not a literal planet colliding with Earth, but the gravitational consequences of a massive world drawing near. A world whose return marked the transition from one age to another. As millennia passed, that cosmic knowledge fragmented further. The Egyptians remembered the pattern but changed the names. Thoth, Osiris, Isis, the gods who sailed the celestial bark. The Greeks transformed them into titans and Olympians. The Hebrews reinterpreted them as angels and watchers. Each culture kept the structure but lost the source. The gods became moral symbols, the sky became religion, and the science became myth. What once had been observation turned into worship. What had been calculation became prophecy. The world forgot the crossing, yet the monuments remained, buried under sediment, hidden in jungles, misaligned with the present heavens, but still humming with the same geometry, as if waiting for someone, someday, to remember the code. And in that silence, the long amnesia of humanity, something else was lost. The understanding that cycles are inevitable. Civilization rises not once, but many times. Each time the heavens move, the world resets, and the survivors rebuild. Perhaps the fall of each age is not punishment. Perhaps it is the rhythm of the cosmos itself, a breath in and out across eternity. We are the children of that silence. We live on the ruins of civilizations that measured the stars and left us warnings we can no longer read. But as our own telescopes begin to pierce the dark again, as we rediscover the hidden planet whose orbit mirrors their myths, something ancient is stirring. The silence is breaking, and when the next crossing comes, perhaps it will not be a flood or a fire, but a revelation, because the last time humanity forgot the gods became myth. This time, when the heavens move again, perhaps myth will become reality. the age of denial. We live in an era of brilliance and blindness. Our machines see farther than the eyes of any priest or pharaoh. Our satellites map the invisible. Our algorithms predict the weather of stars. Yet for all our knowledge, we have forgotten how to listen. The ancients watched the heavens with reverence. We watch them with skepticism. They saw meaning in movement. We see only data. And when the data begins to echo their myths, we call it coincidence. This is the paradox of our age. The closer we come to rediscovering the truth, the harder we work to deny it. In the last century, the story of Nibiru became a kind of cultural virus, spreading through books, documentaries, and internet forums. For scientists, it was an embarrassment. For the public, a fascination. For governments, an opportunity for ridicule. The pattern is predictable. A whisper of discovery leaks from an observatory. A researcher mentions an anomaly. A journalist connects it to ancient prophecy. And instantly, the idea is drowned beneath the noise of mockery. Because modern civilization fears one thing above all else, the collapse of its own certainty. To admit that the Sumerians may have recorded a truth that we are only now rediscovering would mean accepting that history is not linear, that knowledge rises and falls like civilizations themselves. It would mean admitting that we are not the first to reach for the stars. And so, denial becomes a shield, a fragile defense against awe. In the early 2000s, the term Nibiru was hijacked by apocalyptic movements that predicted planetary collisions and end-of-the-world prophecies. Every failed prediction reinforced the scientific disdain. Every exaggeration buried the legitimate questions deeper. The word became radioactive. It could no longer be spoken in academic circles without career-ending consequences. And so, the search for Planet 9, the same object, stripped of its mythic name, continued quietly under a new banner. The irony is almost cruel. Scientists are now doing exactly what the Sumerians once did, mapping the heavens in search of a hidden planet whose orbit matches the ancient description. But to preserve the illusion of progress, they cannot admit the parallel. The myth and the math have been forcibly separated. Yet, beneath the laughter, the data grows louder. More than 30 distant trans-Neptunian objects show orbital clustering. Comets arrive from unexpected directions. The sun's axial tilt remains unexplained. Something massive, unseen, is still out there. But the public only hears the noise, the doomsday cults, the internet hysteria, the deniers, the debunkers. Truth and madness have been tangled into one thread, impossible to separate. And in that confusion, the ancient story has been buried again, not beneath water this time, but beneath ridicule. Perhaps that is the modern flood, not of water, but of information. A deluge of noise that drowns meaning itself. When Zecharia Sitchin died in 2010, his critics celebrated the end of the Nibiru nonsense. But a few years later, when Badigan and Brown announced the mathematical evidence for a massive hidden planet, something shifted. Quietly, discreetly, without credit, science had circled back to the forbidden idea. Only the name was missing. We are repeating the same pattern our ancestors did. Knowledge rising, suppressed, forgotten, rediscovered, ridiculed, and reborn. The cycle of understanding mirrors the cycle of the heavens. We call it progress, but perhaps it is only orbit, the same truths returning again under new skies. Maybe denial is not ignorance. Maybe it is fear, the fear of remembering what happened the last time the heavens moved. Because deep down, somewhere beneath our logic and pride, a part of us remembers. The flood, the fire, the silence that followed. We laugh because we are afraid. We ridicule because we sense the pattern returning. And perhaps that is why, even now, our greatest discoveries are always followed by denial. Because if the ancients were right, if there truly is a planet whose passage reshapes the Earth, then everything we believe about time, history, and destiny would have to change. And civilization does not handle change well. So we keep searching and pretending not to. We build more telescopes, map the outer dark, and talk about gravitational anomalies, never daring to speak the ancient name. But the silence that once buried Nibiru is cracking. The data is growing too clear, the coincidences too precise, the myths too familiar. Sooner or later, the laughter will fade. And when it does, the world will have to look up again, not as scientists, not as believers, but as witnesses. Because denial can delay truth, but it cannot erase it. The orbit always returns, and with it, the memory of the gods, the watchers in the data. The priests of Sumer watched the heavens from the tops of ziggurats. They inscribed what they saw into clay tablets, believing that the gods spoke through the movement of stars. Today, our priests sit before glowing screens, their ziggurats made of glass and silicon. They too are watching the sky, and whether they admit it or not, they too are searching for Nibiru. But this time, the watchers are not human. Artificial intelligence now reads the heavens for us. It compares millions of star maps, tracks minute deviations, and calculates gravitational influences invisible to any eye. Where ancient astronomers saw mythic meaning, our algorithms see mathematical anomaly. Yet both are describing the same thing, a disturbance in the order of heaven. In 2024, several research groups began using machine learning to analyze data from the Dark Energy Survey, the Subaru Telescope, and ALMA. They were looking for patterns too subtle for human analysis, weak signals buried in oceans of digital noise, and slowly, something began to emerge. Across different data sets, separated by instruments and time, the AI found a faint but consistent pull, a region of sky that seemed to warp the trajectories of distant objects. The models estimated a mass roughly 10 Earths, orbiting far beyond Pluto, exactly what Battigan and Brown had predicted. But the coordinates matched something else, something far older. The same region described in ancient Babylonian tablets as the Gate of the Gods, the place of crossing. Coincidence again. Always coincidence. One team of astrophysicists in Japan published a brief preprint in late 2024 titled Deep Learning Constraints on the Outer Solar System. The abstract was cautious, the language clinical, but buried in the data appendix was a line that sent chills down the spines of those who understood. Residual clustering is statistically significant and exhibits recurrence consistent with an orbital period of approximately 3.524.0 x 103 years, 3,500 to 4,000 years. The Sumerian SAR, the forbidden number. No one mentioned Nibiru, of course. The paper was quietly archived, then removed. But the data had already escaped, copied, discussed, and analyzed by the growing community of independent astronomers who exist outside the boundaries of official funding. And in their forums, a phrase began to appear again, almost playfully at first, then more insistently, the planet of crossing. AI doesn't believe in myths, but it recognizes patterns. It doesn't care about ridicule or reputation. It finds what is there, and what is there now looks eerily like what the ancients described. Even space agencies, though cautious, have noticed. In 2025, a reanalysis of WISE and TESS data using neural network filters detected faint anomalies, moving infrared sources with trajectories that didn't fit any known object. Publicly, they were called data artifacts. Privately, some researchers whispered that one of them might not be. But technology, for all its power, has a strange way of circling back to mystery. The more we measure, the more the unknown expands. It is as if the universe enjoys being seen but not understood. And so, modern science finds itself in the same position as ancient Sumer, staring into the sky, unable to explain what it sees. The difference is only in language. Where they spoke of gods and omens, we speak of mass and vectors. But the question is the same. What is out there, beyond the reach of light? Maybe that's why even the algorithms seem restless. AI systems trained on astronomical data have begun producing poetic anomalies, generating names, patterns, and symbolic associations that eerily echo ancient mythology. One deep learning model, nicknamed its discovered anomaly, the Wanderer. Another called it the returning star. These were random outputs, of course, statistical artifacts in natural language processing. And yet, somewhere between logic and myth, the machines are dreaming the same dream humanity has dreamed for 5,000 years. Perhaps it's not coincidence that the more we let machines look at the heavens, the more they begin to sound like prophets. Perhaps, like us, they are sensing the pulse, that vast, slow rhythm that beats beneath both myth and math. Because the universe does not care whether the observer is made of clay or code. It speaks to whoever listens, and now something in the data is speaking again, not loudly, just enough to be heard by those who still remember the word. Nibiru, the secret archives. Every civilization has its priesthood, not of faith, but of control. The Sumerians guarded their temple records. The Egyptians sealed their star maps within the walls of pyramids. The medieval church hid forbidden knowledge in vaults beneath Rome. And in the modern world, the guardians wear lab coats instead of robes. Their temples are space agencies. Their prayers are equations. And their greatest secret may be that the crossing has already been found. Behind the bright screens of open science, there exists another sky, a classified one, a sky mapped by surveillance satellites, deep space probes, and military telescopes whose data never reaches the public. We like to believe that astronomy belongs to curiosity, not secrecy. But in truth, the heavens are as strategic as the oceans or the atom. In the 1980s, during the height of the Cold War, NASA's infrared astronomical satellite, IRAS, scanned the heavens for the first time in the infrared spectrum. In 1983, the Washington Post published a short but explosive story. A heavenly body, possibly as large as Jupiter and part of this solar system, has been found in the direction of the constellation Orion. Then, silence. Within weeks, NASA retracted the claim, calling it a misinterpretation. The data was archived, the story forgotten, but not by everyone. Years later, researchers who accessed the IRS archives found gaps, entire sectors redacted or marked as noise. Why redact data from a telescope? What could infrared sensors have seen that visible light could not? Rumors spread of a large, cold object far beyond Pluto, something that glowed faintly in the infrared. When questioned, NASA scientists dismissed it as background galaxies. Yet the coordinates of that supposed galactic anomaly matched the ancient region known to the Babylonians as the Path of Marduk, the same part of the sky where 30 years later, the search for Planet 9 would begin. Coincidence or continuity? Whispers persist that certain discoveries are deliberately delayed, that sky surveys are quietly edited before release, not because they reveal aliens or gods, but because they threaten the narrative of stability. Imagine telling the world that a massive planet on a thousands-year orbit may occasionally destabilize the solar system. Imagine suggesting that ancient cultures might have known about it and even feared its return. How would science, religion, or politics survive such an admission? It's easier to hide data than to face that question. In 1992, the COBE mission recorded unexplained thermal signatures at the solar system's edge. The report vanished into classified archives. In 2010, WISE detected multiple moving infrared sources, later labeled noise and removed from public datasets. In 2016, shortly after the Planet 9 hypothesis was announced, several research satellites were quietly repointed toward that region of the sky, officially for background calibration. Unofficially, according to insiders, they found something that shouldn't be there. Of course, there are no official statements, only absences, the kind of silence that speaks louder than words. If knowledge of a distant planet existed in ancient times, it would have been hidden the same way, encoded, buried, reserved for the initiated. The priests of Babylon called it the secret of the heavens. The Egyptians named it the hidden star. Even the Bible alludes to it. And the stars of heaven fell unto the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. Ma, what if those phrases weren't metaphors? What if they were reports, memories of the last time the crossing occurred, protected through secrecy and symbol? The same secrecy now may be repeating itself, only under the guise of scientific caution and national security. Because some truths are too powerful to publish, not because they are false, but because they are true. If a hidden planet truly exists, then its discovery would rewrite human history. It would confirm that the ancients were right, that myth was memory, not fantasy. It would connect the birth of civilization with the rhythm of the cosmos itself, and it would force us to confront a terrifying question. If the orbit is real, when is the next crossing? That question perhaps already has an answer, one sealed in data vaults, classified reports, and encrypted coordinates we are not allowed to see. But the truth, like the planet, cannot remain hidden forever. It moves slowly, inevitably through the darkness, drawing nearer with every calculation, and one day soon the secret archives will open themselves, not because permission is granted, but because the sky will make its own announcement. When that happens, denial will end, and the age of silence will be over. The cycles awaken. At first, it feels like coincidence. A storm stronger than any in recorded history. A polar vortex shifting south. Earth's magnetic field weakening faster than predicted. The jet stream, once steady, twisting like a wounded serpent. But patterns are patient. They wait for us to notice. Across the globe, scientists whisper that something is off. Weather behaves like memory. Oceans move out of rhythm. The climate models, once precise, now scatter into chaos. And deep beneath the noise of modern life, the old pulse begins to beat again, slow, vast, and familiar. The ancients would have recognized it instantly. They would have said, "The cycle has turned." Geophysicists track anomalies in the Earth's core, the magnetic poles drifting faster than at any point in recorded history. In 1900, they shifted a few miles per year. Now, they race north at 40 miles annually. Some researchers predict a full reversal within centuries, others within decades. The last time the poles flipped, the world was plunged into climatic turmoil. The ice sheets melted, species vanished, civilizations disappeared. And when the skies cleared, a new age began. Ancient myth calls it the Great Flood. Geology calls it the Younger Dryas. Perhaps both are names for the same event, the last crossing. Solar activity, too, has grown unpredictable. The sun's magnetic cycles, once regular, are now erratic. Solar physicists report an anomalous minimum, a lull that may precede violent flares. The Sumerians spoke of this too. When Nibiru nears, the sun grows restless and the heavens tremble. Modern science translates that into plasma physics. Ancient myth described it as the anger of the gods. Different language, same event. Even our planet's orbit is not immune. Tiny variations in eccentricity and tilt, known as Milankovitch cycles, alter the balance of seasons over tens of thousands of years. Most assume these are purely gravitational interactions between Earth, Jupiter, and Saturn. But what if there's a missing factor? What if an unseen planet on a great elliptical path occasionally nudges those cycles just enough to trigger the reset? As our climate spirals into extremes, humanity's behavior mirrors the instability above. Empires tremble under invisible pressures, economic, social, existential. Technology unites and divides, accelerates and destroys. It is as if we are reenacting the same drama that played out at the end of the last age. A species standing at the edge of its own creation, unsure whether it will rise or fall. Civilizations, like planets, orbit around meaning. When that meaning is lost, they drift into chaos, until something massive pulls them back into alignment. The Sumerians called that force Nibiru. We might call it gravity, but perhaps the two are not so different. Patterns overlap. The Schumann resonance, Earth's electromagnetic heartbeat, has spiked beyond historic averages. Volcanic activity increases, Earthquakes cluster along once stable fault lines. Astronomers notice unusual perturbations in trans-Neptunian objects. Everything vibrates with quiet tension, as though the cosmos is inhaling before an exhale we cannot yet comprehend. Is this the start of the next crossing, or merely the memory of one repeating through nature's pulse? Even skeptics admit something is synchronizing: climate, magnetism, orbit, and human history itself. It feels less like a crisis and more like a rehearsal. The ancients spoke of ages: gold, silver, bronze, and iron, each ending in fire or flood. Hindu cosmology speaks of yugas, the Maya of suns, the Egyptians of turnings of the great year. Every culture marks the same idea, that time itself breathes, expanding and contracting, erasing and renewing, and in that breath, worlds are remade. Maybe Nibiru isn't just a planet. Maybe it's the embodiment of the cosmic rhythm, the reset mechanism built into creation itself, a reminder that no civilization, no matter how advanced, stands outside the cycles that govern the stars. We are not victims of those cycles. We are participants. The ancients feared them. We record them. But both are forms of reverence, because to acknowledge the cycle is to remember where we came from and where we are going. So as satellites flicker, storms intensify, and data whispers of movement in the outer dark, humanity stands once again where Sumer once stood, staring upward, feeling the rhythm of a sky that will not stay still. Something vast is stirring, unseen but inevitable. The crossing, it seems, has already begun. The return of the gods. Every culture, from Sumer to the Andes, spoke of a promise that one day the gods would return, but they never said when, only that the sky would move, the stars would realign, and the earth would tremble as before. To modern ears, such prophecies sound poetic, even apocalyptic, but to the ancients, they were astronomy, the prediction of a cycle, not the end of the world. The return was not destruction, it was renewal, a rebalancing of the heavens after the long silence of the orbit. And maybe, just maybe, that renewal is happening now. If the Sumerian texts are to be believed, the Anunnaki came from Nibiru during its last approach, roughly 6,000 years ago at the dawn of civilization. They were described not as ethereal spirits, but as physical beings, tall, luminous, masters of metallurgy and sky travel. They taught writing, agriculture, mathematics, the foundations of human order. Then they left, promising to return when the planet of crossing once again neared the sun. To mythologists, these are symbolic stories about divine wisdom. To historians, they are cultural allegories. But to a few daring researchers, they are records, literal accounts of contact encoded for survival. If that is true, then the question is not if they return. It is how. Imagine for a moment how such a return would look in the modern world. There would be no blazing chariots in the sky, no gods descending in golden armor. Instead, it would unfold through signals and anomalies, the language of data and light, a pulse in the magnetosphere, a strange gravitational echo, a voice not spoken but transmitted. In the age of satellites and AI, revelation would not arrive as myth, it would arrive as information. And indeed, whispers are already spreading through scientific networks. Unclassified signals, unknown sources, irregular radio bursts repeating from the direction of the outer solar system. Most are dismissed as pulsars, background noise, or simple coincidence. But what if coincidence is the language of the gods? The subtle way the cosmos tells us that the orbit is closing again. Throughout human history, every great leap, every explosion of knowledge has coincided with astronomical change. The rise of Sumer followed the end of the last ice age. The Egyptian dynasties flourished under a stable sun. The Renaissance emerged after a shift in solar cycles and magnetism. Now, as we stand on the threshold of the digital age, something once again is awakening, an acceleration of intelligence, both human and artificial, that feels guided. Could this be the new form of divine contact? Not gods descending, but consciousness expanding, not a visitation, but a transmission, a merging of the human and the cosmic, as if the same spark that once descended from the stars is reawakening within us. Perhaps this is what the ancients meant all along by the return of the gods, not the arrival of beings, but the reemergence of awareness, the restoration of memory. Every time the great planet approaches, humanity remembers a little more. Science and myth draw closer together. Logic and wonder reconcile. We remember what we are, children of the stars, participants in a living universe that moves in cycles too vast for one lifetime to grasp. The ancients feared the gods because they brought both knowledge and reckoning. To know the truth of the cosmos was to bear its weight, and that may be the challenge of our time as well, to face the vastness without flinching, to rediscover awe without collapsing into fear. If the cycle is real, if Nibiru is nearing again, then its return may not be physical at all. It may be psychological, spiritual, vibrational, a shift in how consciousness resonates with the cosmos. The flood this time may not be of water, but of awareness, a deluge of information that washes away illusion, revealing the deeper architecture beneath. And already we feel it. Old systems cracking, old beliefs dissolving, technology evolving faster than our ethics can follow. It is the same pattern that precedes every new age, chaos before alignment. The gods are returning, not as conquerors, but as mirrors. They are not coming from the stars. They are awakening through us. When the next crossing completes, whether in centuries or decades, we will not meet the gods in the sky. We will meet them within the human story, within our own rediscovered potential. Because maybe Nibiru is not only a planet, maybe it is a symbol of remembrance, the orbit of awakening that brings knowledge back to its source. And if so, then the return has already begun. The memory of fire. Every rebirth demands a sacrifice. The ancients knew this. They called it purification by fire, the cleansing that comes when the heavens move and the earth remembers what it has forgotten. To them, fire was not simply destruction. It was renewal, the final trial before the dawn. But for those who lived through it, it was terror made visible. And if the cycles of the past are turning again, then perhaps we are standing at the threshold of that same purging light. Across myth and scripture, fire is always the second flood. After the deluge that drowned the world came the flames that reshaped it. The Rig Veda calls it the fire of Surya, which burns away the unworthy. The Greeks spoke of Phaethon, the son of the sun, who lost control of his father's chariot and scorched the earth. The Mayans spoke of sons destroyed by fire before new ones were born. And in the book of Revelation, fire falls from heaven as the world is remade. Different languages, same memory. The fire that ends an age and begins another. Geologists find echoes of it too. Layers of ash and soot in cores dating back 12,000 years, exactly when the last global reset occurred. Something burned, everywhere, all at once. It was as if the sky itself had fallen. If Nibiru exists, if a massive planet periodically disturbs the balance of the solar system, then its passage could trigger exactly such an event. A shift in gravitational fields could awaken dormant comets from the Oort cloud, sending them inward in waves that last centuries. Even a few impacts could darken skies, ignite forests, and plunge the world into chaos. This is not fantasy. It is astrophysics. And yet it reads like myth, as though the old stories were scientific memories, translated into the poetry of survival. The Sumerians wrote of Enlil's fury, the storm of fire that devoured the earth. The Hopi spoke of the red Kachina, a fiery celestial being who returns at the end of the fourth world to purify the planet. To the Egyptians it was Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of the burning breath. To the Persians, the Saoshyant's cleansing flame. Everywhere the same image. Fire from heaven, followed by renewal. Today, we understand that fire can come not only from the sky, but from within. Volcanoes awakening, magnetic fields shifting, solar flares striking the Earth's fragile electric web. The same cosmic tension that moves planets may stir the planet's molten core, and perhaps that is already happening. In 2023 alone, volcanic activity reached levels unseen in modern times. The sun entered an unexpectedly intense phase. Auroras danced over latitudes that had never seen them before, glowing curtains of plasma painting the night sky blood red. To ancient eyes, this would have been unmistakable, the return of the fire. But not all fire destroys. Some illuminates. Some burns away the false so that truth can breathe again. If Nibiru's return marks a new cycle, not just physical, but spiritual, then the fire may represent transformation, not annihilation. Look around. Humanity is burning through its illusions at unprecedented speed. Institutions collapse, beliefs crumble, truths once sacred turn to ash under the light of new understanding. It is as if the universe itself is cleansing us of what no longer serves. Maybe the fire the ancients feared is not only celestial. Maybe it is the awakening of consciousness, spreading like flame through a world built on forgetting. In myth, after the fire always comes light. The phoenix rises from its ashes. The earth, blackened but alive, blooms again. The gods return not as judges but as guides, and civilization, reborn, begins to build anew, this time with a little more memory, a little more wisdom, carried forward from the age before. We are standing on that threshold now, between the burning and the becoming. Whether the fire comes from the sky or from within, its purpose is the same, to remind us that endings are only the universe changing form. The ancients called it judgment. We might call it evolution, but both are the same event, the moment when the cosmos resets its clock and begins the orbit again. So if the skies grow brighter, if the world trembles, if fire returns to the earth, remember that it has happened before, and remember that we are here because life always survives the flame. The memory of fire is not a warning, it is a promise that even after the world burns, the stars will still rise, and humanity will still remember the song of the heavens, the crossing. It always ends where it began, beneath the stars, with eyes turned upward and hearts full of questions. 5,000 years ago, the priests of Sumer stood on their ziggurats, watching the heavens move and wondering what the gods had planned. Tonight, our telescopes point toward that same sky, chasing the same unseen wanderer, asking the same question in a different tongue: what is coming? The word Nibiru has traveled far, across empires, languages, and millennia. It began as a symbol of the crossing, the moment when heaven and earth align. It became a planet, a myth, a warning, a hope, and now it has become a mirror, reflecting the cycle of our own awakening. Because the story of Nibiru is not about an object in the sky. It is about the relationship between knowledge and remembrance. Each time humanity rises, we rediscover what the last age forgot. We name it differently, measure it differently, but the truth is always the same. We are part of a living cosmos, one that breathes, shifts, and speaks through rhythm. Every flood, every fire, every renaissance is a heartbeat in that cosmic pulse. Perhaps the planet exists, hidden in the outer dark, tracing its slow arc around the sun. Perhaps it is only metaphor, the embodiment of the eternal return. It does not matter, because either way, the crossing is real. It happens whenever human consciousness reaches the next threshold, whenever myth becomes data and data becomes revelation. Right now, that crossing is unfolding again. The ancients built monuments to mark it in stone. We build servers and satellites to mark it in light. They called their knowledge divine. We call ours technological. But both are forms of remembrance, the cosmos remembering itself through the minds it creates. In the end, maybe Nibiru is not a world out there, but a world within, a gravitational truth that pulls every civilization back toward its origins. a reminder that we are not separate from the universe, but part of its orbit, its heartbeat, its endless cycle of death and renewal. And when that rhythm accelerates, as it does now, the veil between science and spirit begins to dissolve. We start to see what the ancients saw, that the gods and the stars are not different things, that creation and destruction are the same motion seen from opposite sides of time. That is the meaning of the crossing. It is not a catastrophe. It is communion. So when the next signal comes from the outer dark, whether it is a gravitational echo, a returning planet, or the awakening of something deep within ourselves, we will know what it means. It will be the reminder that every ending is a beginning. Every silence is preparation for a new song. The Sumerians would say the gods are returning. Astronomers would say the orbit is closing. But perhaps both are saying the same thing, that the universe is coming home to itself. And when the world trembles once more, when the heavens shimmer as they did in the first days, remember this: we have been here before. We will be here again. Because the cosmos forgets nothing. It only waits for us to remember. The crossing is not prophecy, it is destiny. And destiny, like the stars, always returns.